and welcome to our webinar on the Ultimate GMAT Study Guide Plan for Round 2. My name is Dave Green, and I'm going to be talking for the next hour about how to build a study plan in order to get you ready to apply for an MBA. I hope we'll have a good time together. Before we get started, just to make sure that I'm not sitting alone here talking into the void, but actually I'm having a conversation. If one or more of you could just let me know that you can actually hear me. There's a chat function on the right side of your screen. Yes, yes. Hello, Dave. Hi, yes. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Rohit. Wow, you guys are fast. Thank you very much. Good morning. Hi from Sweden. Fantastic. Good to meet you. Hi, Laura. Hi, Amir. Good morning from India. All right, guys, thank you very much. It's fun to see how quick and responsive you guys are. And now Nigeria as well. Awesome. Now you have discovered our chat function, and feel free to use it throughout. We have an hour, and I want to try and answer your questions as we go along. If I won't have time, then you should still write them, and I'll get to them at the end in writing or out loud, one of the two. So anyway, before we even get started, I want to say thank you to you guys for being here and for answering me so quickly from places like Kenya and India, and tell you that we have, as a token of our appreciation, 25% off of our GMAT courses on examPAL.com, valid throughout the week until September 28th. So don't hesitate to take us up on this offer and use us to prepare for the GMAT in the next coming weeks and months. So we're going to talk about how to prepare. And before we dive into that, I want to give you guys a brief introduction into who we at examPAL are and what it is we do. Okay, so what is examPAL? examPAL is a company which we've started as a group of GMAT teachers who understood that students all over the world were frustrated and that they were right to be frustrated. They were paying too much for the wrong product. And what's worse, that they only realize that they do so when it's too late, after they've already paid for it and gone through it. And there are a few reasons that we recognize this is the situation. One is that on the GMAT, there are often many different ways to solve each question, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, whereas most courses are one size fits all, right? You're in a classroom, there's a teacher, and he teaches everybody one way to solve a question. But what's the best way to solve for me might not be the best way to solve for Nikita from India, just for example. And that's something that can be missed in a regular course. Another thing is that really what these tests are about, what this test is about, is not the material, which is basic, and most people get to a baseline where they know the material well, but it's about time. In other words, it's not about just knowing what's the right answer, but it's about knowing how to answer the question in the fastest way for you. And again, the fastest way for me might not be the fastest way for someone else. What this goes to say is that a standard course, in the fact that it's uniform and the same for everyone, misses out on a lot of the customization, which is important for the GMAT itself. And finally, if you're taking a one-size-fits-all course, or studying with a book, which is also in its essence one-size-fits-all, you are, by definition, working on a large range of questions which are not fitted for you. Some of them might be too easy, and they're a waste of time for you. Some of them might be too hard, and there's going to be frustrating at the stage at which you're in now. What we want to do is study at a level that's where we are and a little bit above where we are, so we can progress and challenge ourselves. So this is the problem. And the way examPAL tries to tackle these things is by taking a different approach to the GMAT and to test prep in general. examPAL is worse, and using artificial intelligence and machine learning technology, it studies the way that you think while you're using it. So once you solve questions, studying the way you solve them and what are your strengths and weaknesses, work on that. Basically, combined, it has from all of our other hundreds of thousands of students from all over the world about each question, how most people solved it correctly, together with the specific information we get on you as you're using it, to combine these two to give a recommendation of what we think the best way to solve the question is for you. So just to, I see a few of you are saying my voice is breaking or is distorted. I'm obviously not happy to hear that. Is that still the case, or is it better? I'll keep going for now. Anyway, so what examPAL has at its core is a skill that we work on, which we call cognitive flexibility, by which we mean the ability to change the set of tools that we're using quickly according to the changes in the data that we're getting. Okay, and since the test has harsh time constraints, and in it we get in one question algebra and then geometry and then word problems, and we have to shift gears between them very quickly. So this is the skill we work on, not just providing you with the knowledge you need for the test, but training you for the fastest way to solve each question. Okay, so just to give you a really quick look at what it looks like. So we work a lot on teaching different ways to solve each and every question. So for example, the question that you see on the screen now, for every positive x and y, 3x plus 2y over x plus y is between. So we say there's not one correct way to solve this. We can solve it what we call the precise way, in which we'll simplify the equation and keep going until we get this fraction that we have on the right, which we can then say is larger than 2, which will give us the answer. Okay, and that's a good way to solve it, but we could also go a completely different way. We could say instead that, well, let's just plug in a number. We don't need to really solve this equation. Let's just pretend for a minute that, since we don't know what x and y are, let's decide on our own. So let's say that x is 1 and y is 1. And then in that case, this equals 5 over 1, or over 2, sorry, which is 2.5, which again gives us the answer. And this is this is an example of what we call the alternative way to solve, of using all kinds of shortcuts which get us to the answer quickly, even if we're not quite sure how it is we got there. And finally, we could use what we call the logical approach, which doesn't involve really playing with the numbers at all, but just looking at it a kind of a high-level way and saying, well, we have here a numerator which is more than twice what the denominator is, but less than 3 times, meaning whatever it is, it has to be more than 2 and less than 3. So these 3 examples of solutions of way to solve are 3 examples of the 3 major tools that we teach: precise, alternative, and logical, which together make up PAL. That's what examPAL means. So I'm going to run through the rest of this because I really want to get to talking about our study guide. But suffice it to say that we use our machine learning technology to give you for each question a recommendation of which tool to use. We have high scores, and our customers are very happy. And the last thing I want to mention is we're the only test prep out there that I'm aware of that puts our money where our mouth is and gives a success guarantee, which means if you have previous official GMAT score, we guarantee an improvement of 70 points at least, or your money back. So take us up on that. Go to examPAL.com and look at our guarantee with all the details. All right, so that's who we are. Now let's talk about how to build a study plan ahead of round 2, okay? So there are a lot of questions when we want to build a study plan, and the first one that we're going to address is how long do you need for the study plan? Now, this question itself is made up of 2 more specific questions. The first of them is, how long do we need in total on the calendar? So when should we start studying if we know that we're going to take the test on date X? And the other one is, how much will we need in absolute terms, in hours. How many hours will we need? So I'm going to first answer the second question because it's a little bit simpler, whereas the first one is more dependent on your personal situation. So the answer to how many hours is, if you study right, and that's a big if, which we're going to talk about what I mean by that. But if you study right, we think 100 to 120 hours from what we see is enough to study comprehensively and be prepared for the GMAT test. And you can start doing calculations in your head how long that amount of time should be spread over. Obviously, it's dependent on how much time you have to give. Now, before you do that, though, I should say 100 to 120 hours is kind of the basic course. If you're a non-native English speaker, we recommend making that 130 to 150 hours, adding an extra 30 hours to work on your verbal skills before you even start in the study plan, giving yourself a couple of weeks to really work on reading in English and working on your vocabulary. Okay? And now to answer the first question, how long should this be spread over? So this is what really we're going to talk about for much of the next hour or so. But I'm just going to give you a quick one-size-fits-all answer. All things being equal, we recommend doing this over 6 to 8 weeks, spreading it out over 15 hours of study per week. If you can't, I'm going to talk about why. If you can't, though, don't worry. There are a lot of other options that I'm going to expand upon. Okay? So how long should your study plan be? Should it be a month, 2 months, 3 months, or some other amount of time? So all of these are options, but as I just said, we recommend a 2-month study plan. Okay? Now, why do we do that? Well, I want to start by giving an example of the kind of person. Sukaina asks 150 hours for non-English speakers. Yes, correct, 150 hours. And I hope my voice will hold up and not break. I'll try and address that, but I'm going to keep going right now. So, who is the 2-month plan good for? Okay, so it's good for someone kind of like John Doe. Okay, now what is John Doe like? So John Doe is someone who's taking the GMAT for the first time. Okay, so he needs to study everything from scratch. He has a full-time job, though. He can't just put everything aside and study. He's going to be studying in the evenings and on weekends, most of all. Okay, and John Doe, specifically in his case, his English skills are good, but he's more concerned about studying making it up for it when quant, which he hasn't touched for a while. Now, you don't have to be John Doe. You don't have to be exactly like him in order for this test to work for you. But if you're anything like him, and what I mean by that is if you're someone who's relatively busy on the one hand, but on the other hand can spend most of your spare time studying, then a 2-month plan is the way to go. So what does a 2-month plan look like? Well, there are 2 parts to it. The first part is what we call the material review, okay? And this is what you should spend the first 47 days of your study plan doing, okay? So this is a 60-day plan. So the first 47 days should be devoted to subject review and practice. What does that mean? Well, start by making a list of all of the GMAT topics. Now, if you're using examPAL course, you don't actually need to make this list because it's already there for you. The course is built with a structure of all of these topics. And what you then need to do is create for each one of them a 2-day schedule in which you study each of them, which will overall give you a schedule of all of these mini schedules, meaning this period of time over 47 days in which you study each and every one of them in logical order. Again, in examPAL, we give you the logical order by studying more basic topics like descriptive, like fractions and percents first, and then more advanced topics like descriptive statistics, for example, later. If you're doing it some other way, you'll have to figure out the logic on your own. Okay, so you want to look at your calendar for the next 47 days and figure out how am I going to budget all of these 2-day mini schedules. Obviously, it doesn't mean that you're studying each and every day. It's dependent on your schedule, but this is the outline of, for each one you're going to be studying 2 days, and by a day I mean a few hours, because this is what this plan is aimed at, people who have a few hours in the evening to study. Okay, meaning that a day, if you have a whole day to study on the weekend, that can count as 2 mini days of this mini schedule. So just to make it a little bit more specific, what does this actually look like? So say you're studying circles now. So on the first day, you're going to review the fundamental material of what circles are, what the GMAT wants us to know about circles. Okay, an examPAL, this means watching the intro. There's an intro video in each section giving you all the fundamental material on what this topic is about. Okay, and then there's a lesson video on examPAL I'm just talking about, which goes more specific and talks about answer strategies that are relevant for this tool. So what are we going to use to solve this tool? Now, while you're doing it, I don't want you to just watch the videos like a zombie and move on, but I want you to write a summary, a personal summary of the material. Now, this is very personal, what this actually means by a summary. Some of you might be the kind of person that wants to write down, almost everything, wants to write down any bit of information, and that's fine if you're the kind of person for whom writing it down really helps you memorize. Some of you might be different with how your memory works and not really need that, in which case I'd say that's fine, but still you should write down just the basic formulas and rules that the test requires that we know, which are taught in these videos. And the second thing, and you can combine this with a summary or keep it as a separate list, it's not that important, is to write down practical tips. These are ones that are going to show up more in the lesson videos. Things that aren't just the material itself, but are things that come up as conclusions and actionable rules of thumb that are going to be useful when solving. Okay, so things like, when I see 2 angles that are adjacent to each other, I should remember that it's useful to write them down. If I know that if I see 2 adjacent angles, it's useful to write them down as x and 180 minus x, for example, and then I have only 1 variable instead of 2 variables, just to give a random example of a practical tip that we can use. So that's the first day, and again, you can do this in an evening. If you're working and you come home, you can do this in a few hours in an evening. On the second day, that's when we want to move on and practice and solve questions that are related to the topic. Now, on examPAL, this is automatic. Basically, this just means moving on to the next thing in the lesson, which is the practice, which on examPAL has 3 phases. I'll just say something about for a minute. There's first the diagnostic phase, which is 15 questions that are just straightforward. You see them, you solve them, and meanwhile, the machine is learning about what your level is and which ones you are better at and which ones you need to work on. The second phase we call the improvement phase, and in this phase, you not only solve them, but after you solve them, we ask you, if you got it right, what tools were you using? If you got it wrong, why do you think you got it wrong? And we incorporate that information into what the system knows about you. And then we use that in the third phase, called the optimization phase, in which we give you questions that are calibrated to work on your strengths and weaknesses. And we don't only give you questions that are meant to do this, we give you questions and specific answers. So as I said before, most questions have several answers, but we only show you the answer that we think is best for you. So anyway, however you're studying, that's what this day is about. It's about solving, for example, questions that have to do with circles. And while you're doing it, you're going to be implementing the practical tips that you wrote down and updating that list as well. because obviously while you're solving, you're gonna, it's very likely that you'll get to conclusions about the tips that you already have and think of new tips, and you're gonna incorporate all that and update it. The other thing you're gonna do is make a list of mistakes. This doesn't mean you have to write down every mistake you do, although you could, and that's definitely useful. What it more means, and what I recommend to do, is to write down mistake types. So after each question, you should ask yourself, why did I make this mistake? And as I said, the system will actually be asking you for a lot of them. And when you get 2 questions for which you had the same answer, okay, for 2 questions that you think the mistake reason was similar, then this is a mistake type, and this is what you want to put down on your mistake list, and think about how you could prevent this mistake from happening. This is the most important part. Get at least one actionable conclusion of how to prevent this mistake, whether it's just knowing the material, whether it's implementing some kind of practical tool that you didn't do, or whether it's using a different answer strategy, right? We're all about asking ourselves, are we solving it the right way? Maybe we should be going alternative instead of precise, and so on. So whatever your conclusion is, you're going to be writing it down on this list, and this list, you're going to keep updating it as the course goes along. Okay? So, this is the schedule for the first 47 days, and you're going to need to divide your time between all of these different topics, with the main structure of moving between a topic every 2 days. Okay, and again, on examPAL, basically the course is already built this way. You still need to divide your time to make sure you actually have time for everything on the course. But it'll make sure that you go through all of these phases. And the other thing to add is that as you're doing this, something else you need to fit into your schedule is working on your English skills, on your daily reading and your vocabulary. What do I mean by that? So we recommend reading, first of all. We recommend, and this is, by the way, not only for non-native English speakers. This is for everyone. So we recommend spending time either in the morning or evening reading nonfiction, because that's what reading comprehension is most like. So some magazine that covers hopefully something that interests you, but one that it's high quality, like Time magazine or something like that, or Forbes, and using that to hone your reading comprehension skills. As you're reading, try and ask yourself, what is the author saying? What is the role of this paragraph? What is the role of that paragraph? The type of reading you need to do in reading comprehension. And the other thing, you should be putting aside time to work on your vocabulary. Okay, so we have on examPAL a list of vocabulary words, and you just need to make sure you have time to review them. So you can do reading in the morning, vocabulary in the evening, however you want it, but about an hour and a half per day is what you should be doing. Okay, so don't forget to take a day off a week. It sounds like, I know it sounds like it's busy and you want to be working all the time, but it's not the case. It's important to take some time off. And yeah, that's it. So really what you should be doing now is looking at your calendar for the next 47 days, or for the first 47 days of whenever your study plan is going to be, and trying to fit all this stuff in. And the important thing is to be realistic. What do I mean by that? So I don't know about you guys, but I, like some other people, have a tendency to be overly optimistic oftentimes and say to myself, yeah, I'm going to be doing this day and this that day, and it's not a problem. I'm going to be studying 28 hours a day for about 9 hours per week, and I should cover all of this in a week. And obviously, when we get down to it, then we see that not only are there only 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week, but also we have to spend a lot of those hours doing things that aren't the GMAT. We have to spend those hours sleeping and eating and working and maybe spending some time with friends, although probably not too much for the time you're studying the GMAT, and on it goes. So all I mean by this is be realistic about all other commitments you're going to have both ones that are just basic biological needs like sleeping and ones that are just personal commitments. Your grandma has a birthday and you're going to go. That's fine, but try and take it into account in your schedule beforehand. 47 days is enough time to do this plan, even if you have some other commitments. Pablo knows what I'm talking about. So we're similar procrastination brothers in that sense. So this is the first 47 days. We're not done yet, okay? So we move on from this stage, and after that, we recommend leaving a few days open on your schedule. Not because you're gonna be taking time off and relaxing. That's in 10 days, but not at this stage. But just because, as I just talked about, some things are unforeseen, and even if you plan really meticulously, still there might be new constraints and commitments that pop up. And it's good to have a few open days where we can move and push stuff too. Okay? So that's what 4 days 48, 50 are for. And finally, we get to the last 10 days of your study plan. So what do these last 10 days look like? So basically, it's a rotating 2-day schedule, sort of once again, like we had before. So the first day of every 2 days is devoted to review. Okay, so you just finished going over all the material for the GMAT, and obviously you're going to have stuff that you're good at and stuff that you need to work on more. And that's what you're going to do with 1 day of review. You're going to use it to review topics that need it, whether from the material or practicing them, or going back and re-examining something you read about it, and so on and so forth. Okay? So working on problematic topics, going over the summary that you wrote for yourself, going over the practical tips list that you wrote, and going over the mistakes list. So this is where the more work you put in during the first 47 days and really writing things down, being comprehensive, you're going to have more to go on in the last 10 days of your study. Now, this is, say, every even day. Now, every odd day, okay, so every next day of your 10-day schedule, you're going to be doing a practice test, a GMAT prep official practice test. Try to do it if you can as the actual GMAT. So if if the actual GMAT is in the morning, then try and take it in the morning, and then and try and do it in as similar possible circumstances as you can, which is to say, most importantly, do it without any stops. Okay, just barreling ahead to really test yourself in test-like conditions. Try and do it in a place where it's quiet and no one's going to bother you, and just take it seriously, basically. And then spend the rest of the day analyzing it. So what did I do well? What did I not do well? What did I not do well in terms of material? What did I not do well in terms of answer strategies? How was my time management? Do I need to work on that? And again, this feeds into your next day where you start this 2-day process anew by reviewing. And the first thing you're going to be reviewing is whatever was revealed to be problematic in the practice test you took the day before. Prabha Karan, I hope I said that right, asks how many mocks do I suggest. So there are only 6 official GMAT prep mocks, out of which 2 are free for everyone. 4 you get if you take the GMAT course, and another 2 that can be purchased. I recommend doing 4 or 5, not more, because again, I recommend doing 1 every other day, and I recommend spending 10 days doing this, and not less, because you're not going to get it right the first time. And I see that someone is surprised by this 4 months for 2 months study plan. Yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, I'll be more specific. There's nothing wrong with doing more mocks if you want and if you have the time, for sure. But there are a few important caveats to this. One is, as I just said, there are only 6 official GMAT prep mocks. All other mocks out there are not official, and in that sense, they will be lacking in some way, right? They won't have actual questions that were on the test. Most of them won't be adaptive, and so on and so forth. And the deeper issue is that doing mocks earlier in your practice, in your study plan, is really just going to reveal to you that you're not ready, which is not that useful because you know you're not going to be ready at an earlier point, right? It makes sense to do the mocks once you're done studying. So if you want to make it, if you want to do a mock every day and not every other day, you can do that. But I don't recommend doing what I know some people do, which is just taking mocks all throughout their studies. It's not all that useful. Natalie asks, would this be suitable if I've taken the GMAT before? Yes, this whole study will be suitable. Taking the GMAT, I'll say a few words later about redoing it. If I don't, then ask me again, but I'll say it. Pooja asks if you can get a recording of this webinar. Yes, you will all get a recording of this webinar. If you're here, it means you've signed up. You're going to get an email with the recording. So also don't worry if I'm moving too fast for you. You will be able to hear it again. Although if something is unclear, you obviously ask me too. Okay, when I say days, do I mean like an 8-hour day? That's a good question, and you're right, I should be a little bit more specific. So most of the way throughout the study plan I was talking about, when I was saying have a 2-day schedule for each topic, I did not mean 8-hour days, right? Because we said that this plan is meant for people who are working, who have other things they need to do, and a day can be about 3 hours whenever you can spend them. So for most people in the evening, that can be a day. For these last 10 days, though, that's not quite enough. So what I would recommend, and obviously everyone has their own circumstances, but for a lot of people, it should be possible to work throughout these 2 months, but to take a week off or even just a few days off before the test. And if you take a few days off and combine that with a weekend, then you can spend about a week of full days. And that's what I'd recommend doing and with these last few days. So a day in which you take a practice test in the morning, right? It takes a long time. It takes 3 hours. Then analyze it. That can already be at least half a day, and then you can spend time reviewing and working on stuff that the analysis revealed. If you have a completely full day, half a day could also be enough. Okay. So just a few other questions I'll try to address before I keep moving. For 720 score, is it possible to do it in 2 months? Yeah, it's very possible to do it in 2 months. 2 months is the recommended amount of time. That doesn't mean that it'll be easy or guaranteed. 720 is a very high score, and for that reason, if it weren't, then everyone would get it. But yes, if you have the capacity to do it at all, then 2 months should be enough. Whoa, excuse me. I apologize. I hope that didn't hurt your ears. I know that was kind of strong. So, thank you, Giacomo. Nikita, you're saying you have 660. Should you focus on some other study plan? No. We think that this study plan is good for retakers as well. Again, I'll try and address this a little bit later. So for now, I'm going to move on, and I will answer all of your questions later. So this is the 1-month study plan. We're basically done. Take a day off the day before the test, and then ace the test. Okay? And just to kind of tie this back to what we were saying about the kind of person that this plan is for, remember John Doe and all of that. So this is a random week in a sample study plan. So in John Doe's study plan at some point. So look at his week. He gets up in the morning. He spends half an hour working on his vocabulary and memorization, right? Going over the words. Then he spends all day at the office, right? He's a busy guy. He's a working guy. Then he sometimes comes home and keeps studying immediately, but actually no, most of the week he does something else, right? For John, it's going to the gym. For someone else, it could be something else. And then in the evening, that's really that's really when he studies, right? Say after dinner, he spends a few hours studying. But even then, as you'll see, he's not doing that every single day. Say one day a week he has a social commitment, and he does that. But he still manages to study most nights a week. And there's one day where he has to come in early for work, and for that reason, he skips the gym and does the vocabulary later. So he's flexible. He spends time reading before he goes to bed. And then on the weekend, we see, on the one hand, he can spend one of the days studying for a full half day, not just a few hours. And that gives him the ability in one day to do both a review and a practice, which during the week takes him 2 days, right? He does a review on Sunday or Monday and practice on Tuesday, but on Sunday he can do both of them. But he still takes an entire day off, right? So he both works more on the weekend and spends time taking a day off, which is important. So the reason I'm showing you this is not because John Doe's personal life is anyway important, but it's if your schedule can look anything like this. In other words, if you're working, you do have some commitments which you're not going to set aside, but overall you can spend most of your spare time studying, then the 2-month plan is the one we recommend doing. As I've just outlined, that's what we recommend doing, using examPAL for, or however you study. So I'm going to move on to talk about our other study plans for all those of you whose schedule doesn't look like this. Before I do that, I'll just take a look at the questions. Paula asks, if I buy the examPAL course, do I need to buy other materials such as the official guide? Short answer, no. Long answer, the official guide specifically would be the only other material that I would say you could buy, and it might be helpful if you want to study, practice even more. But even that, you don't need to study. examPAL has everything you need, and you definitely don't need any other material aside from that. Sukaina, I hope I said that correctly, says, what examPAL option do I recommend for non-English speakers? I recommend taking the 2-month study plan, exactly as I outlined it, but spending a few weeks before you even started by just working on your English skills. So spending a few weeks before already starting working on your vocabulary and memorization and working on your reading, maybe even more hours a day than you will be doing during the 2-month plan. If you only have 2 months starting now, I might recommend still taking a few weeks off to just work on English skills and then doing a 30-day plan, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. What includes memorization of vocabulary? It entails going over vocabulary, a list of words you need to know for your vocabulary, which on examPAL, it's a section that is built for practicing it. Okay, I'm going to keep moving, guys, because we want to have time for everyone. And I do know that there are a few more questions. I will get to them at the end. Okay, so that was a 1-month plan. 2-month plan. And as I said, it's recommended, but it isn't for everyone. What if you are what if you need to take the GMAT in 30 days? Because that's when the registration for wherever you want to apply ends soon afterwards. So if that's the case, if, say, you're something like Larry. Larry is also a first-time GMAT taker like John, but he's applying in a month. I guess this should be round 2 in your case, but Larry's applying round 1. He also has a 9-to-5 job, and he can devote all of his free time to studying. That's an important point. So on the one hand, this isn't someone who can put all of his life on hold for a month, or it doesn't have to be, I should say. Obviously, if you can put all of your life on hold for a month, that could also work for sure. But the 1-month plan can work for someone who's still has a job and can't spend all day studying. But unlike John, who we saw before, it's not going to work for someone who has a lot of other stuff going on. So it's someone who can devote all of his free time to studying. The downside of a 1-month study plan is that it's stressful. It's not going to be much fun. You're not going to be a very good friend probably for the next month. But the upside is that A, it's fast. You're not going to have time to forget things, which can be a problem with longer plans. And you're just going to be fresh. You're going to know things. You're going to learn everything within a short span of time. And that can be useful. So what does the actual plan look like? Well, it looks a lot like the 2-month plan, okay? Except what we did before in 47 days, we're going to do now in 20 days. And what that means is that instead of spending a 1-day mini schedule for each topic, instead of doing a 2-day schedule for each topic, we're going to have a 1-day schedule for each topic. In other words, we're going to be both reviewing and solving questions on the same day. Now, this says morning and afternoon, but again, it doesn't have to actually be that. A day can be only half a day or only even 3 or 4 hours. But the point is that we're going to fit it all into that amount of time. Obviously, the more time you have, the better. But say for someone who's working, it means he gets back after work, and every day he's going to be studying and spending a good chunk of hours going over, say, the intro and the lesson of a certain topic. As we mentioned before, keeping a summary, keeping a list of tips and things that he sees while he's doing it, and then moving on to the practice phase and solving questions. And as he's doing it, making and updating mistakes list and updating his tips list. Okay? So again, you're going to have to build a schedule. Oh, and also, of course, spending time working on his English skills. So we recommend doing that either in the beginning of the day or the end of the day so as not to break up your studying for the rest of the day. So again, you're going to need to divide your time. So look at your next 20 days, be realistic, and try and schedule a topic per day. If you still do have a few commitments, or you don't actually have 30 days, you have a little bit less, then that means you might have to once or twice do more than a topic per day. If you must do that, try and make it topics that seem easier to you. And if you need to spend a little bit less time on them, but don't skip any topics. We really don't recommend doing that because we want to know everything. Okay. Still try and take a day off a week. Okay. I know that it sounds like something that something that doesn't seem feasible in a 1-month plan, but you still should do it. And the last 10 days really look. That's the first 20 days. The last 10 days look a lot like the last 10 days we had before. Spend a day reviewing, and then spend the next day going over practice tests. So just to cut back to Larry again, although I think the name here is wrong. But anyway, a week in his schedule looks like this. Look, it doesn't look the same as the one we saw before. He's going over vocabulary memorization in the morning. Then he's spending all day at the office, 5 days a week. And then he's coming home, and every day he's sitting down and he's studying. He doesn't have other commitments. He's not going to the gym. He's not going to Sarah's birthday party. He's working. And on the weekend, also, on Sunday, he's not staying half a day. He's studying a full day, right? He's spending 14 hours in all on the weekend. Specifically, he decided to do it in 1 day, which is challenging. You could also do 2 half days. But he's studying hard 1 day, and he still is taking a day off, though. That is true. He's not working every single day of the week. Okay? So again, if your schedule can look something like this, if you can put things aside during the week and on the weekend and study hard, then a 30-day study plan could be right for you. Okay? I hope it's clear how to do that. And then we're going to move on and talk about our last study plan, which is a 90-day study plan. I just see there are a few questions. I probably not going to have time to answer them all now, but guys, I'm going to, at the end, try and answer whatever questions I don't have time for. Yeah, I'll move in for now. So lastly, you might want a longer study plan. And that's if you're anything like Tammy. So Tammy is also taking the GMAT first time, like the other people we spoke about. But she is really, really busy. She can't spend all of her time studying. She can't even necessarily spend most of her time studying. She has lots of other commitments, both during the week and even on some weekends, that keep her from studying all of the time. And this is really the reason that that should lead you to take a 90-day study plan. Okay, we don't recommend studying for 3 months just because you can, just because your test is 3 months away, or just because the feeling of the more the merrier. And if I spend another month, I can just solve another 1,000 questions. So why not? Right? We don't recommend it because 3 months is a long amount of time. And you might get burned out by the time you get there. And you might forget things by the time you're in the last month of your plan. In which case, well, was it worth it? So, so as I mentioned before, we recommend a 2-month plan. Even if you have 3 months off, you can just start it in a few weeks. Maybe work on your English skills in the time you have left, if it's relevant for you. Do 90 when you need to, which to make it, to put numbers to it and be more specific, if you need 3 months in order to budget 120 to 150 hours of studying, that's when you should do a 3-month study plan. Okay? So now let's just talk real quick about what a 3-month study plan looks like. It's going to look a lot like the plans we just talked about, but more spread out. And the part that's going to be more spread out is the first part. So what we did before in 47 or 27 days is now going to be done in 77 days. And what was before done in a 2-day or 1-day mini topic here is going to be in a 3-day mini schedule. This should say 3-day, not 1 day. So 1 day studying fundamental material, right? Going over the intro, going over the lesson, and keeping the lists that we already talked about keeping, summary, practical tips list, and so on. Then spend the next day practicing questions, practicing the material that has to do with the specific topic. And then, since we did most of the plan in a shorter amount of time than we would have liked to, and we did in other plans, then we are going to spend the third day, which again, this is not full days. This is just a few hours. Spend the third day reviewing. That's when we can be actually going over the questions we did, going over our mistakes, updating our mistakes list, and going back to the material if need be, trying to address the mistakes we made and seeing how we can make them better. I see Aitor says he can't hear me. Is that the case for the rest of you? I hope not. Just so I can, okay, it's fine now. Great. Fantastic. So that's the first 77 days. Thank you for saying the audio works fine. And here, again, you should keep a few days open once again in your schedule because, again, it's good to have the option to move things. And then after that, the last 10 days are like the ones we already talked about, okay? You're going to be spending time reviewing and then moving on and taking practice tests the next day. And here again, if you can take time off, then actually your day, these would be great to have if these would be full days. But even if not, we can still make it work. Okay. And your schedule should look like here. It should be based on an hour and a half studying on most weekdays, not necessarily every single weekday, because again, you might have all kinds of commitments that keep you from studying every day, but an hour and a half, which is not that long if you think about it, studying on most weekdays, spending 4 hours studying once a weekend. So overall in the weekend, spending 4 hours studying, however you want to divide that. Again, not that much. That means most of the weekend you're doing other things, but you can set a few hours aside, whether it's an evening or a morning or whatever. And that even takes into account that you might have a few weekends in which you're committed to other things, okay? Say Tammy, who I mentioned before, one weekend she's has a girl's friend, and another week, not weekend, the actual week, she has a business trip, and she has to work around that. And the point is that the 90-day plan can accommodate, as long as she's willing the rest of her time to spend studying, it can accommodate that. Okay? So that's the 3-month study plan. Obviously, take a day off before you take the test, and then ace the test. And that's the 3-month study plan. And so I've gone over 1 month, 2 months, and 3 months. And you definitely should find yourself in one of these. Giacomo asks, if you're not working and have 2 full months to dedicate, you should do that. Yeah, a 2-month study plan would still be great. I mean, you might find that at a certain point you're going to want to incorporate more study material, since if you're studying full-time for 2 months, it's going to be more than 100 hours of study, which is more than you really need to study. Okay, so you should just know that ahead of time, that you could be doing it with less time. But on the other hand, there's nothing wrong with doing a 2-month. I still recommend doing a 2-month study plan, is what I'm trying to say, not waiting and doing a 1-month study plan. There's still advantages to spreading it out over this amount of time. So however many hours you're planning to spend a day on it, a 2-month study plan is still recommended. Okay? And someone asked me before about, what if I've already done the test? What if I'm a retaker? And this is a good question. So the short answer to your question is, you should be doing everything again, but you should be doing it better. Okay? And I realize that might sound a little bit obnoxious, and I don't mean just be better and just don't make mistakes. I really mean it. I mean, you should be doing a study plan again, but you should also be using the advantage of the wisdom of being able to look back, okay, of foresight. So basically, what I mean is, by doing what we call a debrief, okay, start by spending a day or 2 days asking yourself, what went wrong last time? Because if you're doing it again, then I assume that you didn't do as well as you wanted to. So you should be putting your finger on diagnosing what it is that was between you and your perfect score. Now, I'll say, your answer might be, I studied really well, I knew everything really well, I was getting high scores in the mock tests. Okay, this is an important point. But on the day of the test itself, something just didn't work out. And if that's the case, maybe you don't need the whole study plan. Okay, so for that person, maybe you can make do with really signing up in just a few weeks and going over stuff quickly. That might be enough. But if it's something more serious, if the level that you were at in the test itself just wasn't the level where you want to be, if the scores you were getting in the mock test as well were not the final score that you want to get, then that implies that you need a serious study plan. And for you, we recommend taking one of the study plans we talked about. But you should still be spending the first day or two learning from your mistakes and trying to figure out what you want to work on even more. So that's really for retakers. And I have a few additional tips about things you should be doing while you're doing your study plan for all of you, whether you're doing 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months. So the first of them is that it's important to be able to focus things. So mostly mean that your cell phone should be quiet or off and in another room and locked inside of a cupboard. And you get the idea. because that's the number one distracting thing. The second thing is if you're studying on a computer, which I recommend to do if you're studying with examPAL, that's great, but close all the other browsers and have only examPAL open, have only the study material open, again, to avoid distractions. And be studying in a place in which you actually have peace and quiet, okay? So be studying in somewhere where people won't bother you. Now, as you're studying, of course, some things are going to come easily to you, and some things, for each and every one of us, are going to be some things that we just don't get, okay? And that's fine. The important thing is to, A, not get bogged down, and B, not to get nervous or anxious because of this. So what does that mean? How does it look like? Well, if you have trouble grasping something, the question you should be asking yourself is, what problem am I having? If it's something small, if it's just like not even a whole rule, but like a certain scenario inside of a rule, or a certain example that we give in the course, and you just don't understand the example, don't worry about it. This is what we have review days for. So keep a note of it, have a note of things to review, and get back to it later. Keep moving. If it's something more serious, if you're just like, I just don't get the idea behind ratios, okay? I just don't understand in inequalities what happens to quadratic inequalities. So that's something that's worth working on. And it's fine to update your schedule and devote more time to this, and from another topic if need be. Again, never erase another topic entirely, even if it seems like one that you think should be easy for you. But it's fine to spend 3 days on one thing and 1 day on another thing if you see that you actually need it. Okay. And one more thing, while you're studying, while you're practicing, be sure to learn from your mistakes. And I say this because it's kind of natural not to do it. It's natural for many of us to just kind of not like mistakes and sort of shrug them off and say to ourselves, let's keep moving, get that dopamine running from the next one we get right and be happy and keep moving. And I totally understand the instinct, but we shouldn't do this, or we should go back to our mistakes, because that's the way that we can actually learn. So while we're going over our mistakes, we should be asking ourselves a few basic questions. Why did I make this mistake? If it's something to do with the material, right? I just didn't remember the Pythagoras theorem. Go back to the lesson or the introduction and study the material. If it's something to do with a technical issue, and the way to identify this is that it's what I call a silly mistake. It's one that you look and you say, that doesn't really count. I totally had this. I just screwed up. It doesn't really count though. Then you should be thinking yourself of a technical solution, right? That you shouldn't shrug it off by saying it doesn't really count, but actually these are the ones that are the easiest to prevent. So you should be thinking, what can I do to avoid this happening again, right? And it can be something really, really simple, like writing the answers down and eliminating them one by one with a pen and paper, and not doing it in your head because you got confused. It can be something as simple as that, and it's important to learn from it. And finally, it can be a fundamental issue of, I knew the material, I didn't get anything wrong, but I don't think I was doing it the most efficient way. I think I should have been solving it a logical way when I was solving it the precise way. And this is a really important conclusion to get. And once again, the important question is, how am I going to recognize in a different question next time that I should be using this tool? What is the cue or the hint? And that's the thing we should be paying attention to and summarizing on our mistakes list as we go along. Finally, get 8 hours of sleep every night. Exercise, it's worth it. And as I think I talked about throughout this hour, be both optimistic and realistic. Don't set yourself up to do something you can't actually do, but also have faith in yourself. Let yourself study so you can succeed. Finally, I want to return to our special offer for all of you guys. This is a token of our appreciation for being here with me this whole hour, even as I've been sneezing and my voice has been cracking. You guys have been great. So we have 25% off of our GMAT courses on examPAL.com. valid throughout the end of this week. So don't hesitate to take us up on that. That's it, guys. I'm basically done talking. I'll try and hit some of your questions now before I sign off. I see quite a few. So I'll try, and if you see that I'm not getting to it, you can ask me again.